My name is Frank Hodek, and today, July 13th, 2014, I am pleased to have the opportunity to speak not only with a respected law librarian and past president of the American Association of Law Libraries, but also a very good friend. Janis L. Johnston is the recently retired director of the Albert E. Jenner Memorial Law Library of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Our conversation is part of the Oral History of Law Librarianship project, a component of the Spinelli Law Library Reference Shelf on Hine Online. The setting for this conversation is the Hine Suite at the Marriott River Center Hotel in San Antonio, the site of the 2014 annual meeting of the American Association of Law Libraries. Janis, it is a great pleasure for me to speak with you today about your life and career as a law librarian.
The pleasure is all mine. I'm quite honored to be included in this series.
Well, you certainly deserve to be here. So let's begin by learning a little bit about you personally. Can you tell us about your early life, where you were raised, your family background, and what your childhood was like?
All right. Well, I was born in Iowa, but my family moved to northern Indiana when I was about 4.5. So I really am much more a Hoosier than a Hawkeye. I have one sibling, my sister, who is, I say she's 5 years older. She says 4.5. So, Linda. And I think I had almost a perfect childhood. Really wonderful. Both of my parents were a lot of fun, and my mother had a great sense of whimsy, and you know, I can remember in grade school coming home for lunch, and every day there would be this little dish of pudding, and it would always have a surprise in it, a little marshmallow or a piece of fruit or something, but you know, always that kind of fun and surprise.
That's
and
sweet.
My sister and I were notorious for putting on plays in the basement, and she always got the good role, you know.
She was.
She was the older sibling, and so, you know, when we did The King and I, she was Anna and I was the king in my white bathing cap. It looked like Yul Brynner. So, but you know, I was a good student, and had a very stable home life, and my parents were just really good, you know, really good. So I have wonderful memories of childhood.
That's fantastic. We'll talk more about your professional career, but before we do that, let's learn a little bit about what you like to do when you're not working. What are some of your hobbies, passions, pursuits outside of law librarianship?
Well, I like to travel, and now that I'm retired, I really hope to do more traveling. I certainly have traveled a lot with my career, but you know, I've been to some very exotic locales where I've seen the airport, the hotel room, the conference room, and the airport, and so I'm looking forward to really being a tourist in the future. And I also want to spend some time developing my skills at canning and preserving.
Oh.
I've decided I'm going to become the pickle queen of southwestern Michigan when I get settled in my new home up there. So, you know, I love to cook, and I love to entertain, and I have a beautiful new house that I'll be moving into shortly, and so I hope to have a lot of people come visit me, and then I hope to go visit a lot of them. So
Great.
And probably do a little volunteer work with the local public library. It's very small potatoes, and but I'm sure they would welcome any kind of assistance.
Well, I'm sure after your long career in librarianship, not only will you be able to bring some important skills to them, but it'll probably be nice to be doing the grunt work, perhaps, as a volunteer.
Yeah, I can shelf.
There you go. Well, now that we know a little something about your personal life, can you tell us about your educational and professional training, and perhaps your early career aspirations?
Well, I went to Purdue University and got a bachelor's in European history. of course, a degree that opens thousands of doors for employment. But after college, I started working in a library, Indiana University's campus in South Bend, and I worked there for a couple of years and kind of got the library bug. And so then I went to Illinois for library school and had a very, very good experience there. Wonderful teachers, and in fact, I took a class in legal bibliography, and that was the one year that Bob Baring was at Illinois.
Oh my gosh.
And so I had learned legal research from him, and I think that really ultimately had an impact on my choice of career.
So you were one of the first commando legal researchers.
Yeah.
Very good.
So it was great. It was a great class. After I graduated from library school, I went to Indianapolis, where I started out as a cataloger at the public library there, Marion County, Indianapolis Public Library. And I always have loved tech services and loved cataloging, but the library was kind of a more routinized, process than I felt terribly comfortable with. And a friend of mine knew one of the judges in Indianapolis who oversaw the county law library. And so she suggested that I apply for the position of librarian at the county law library, and I did, and they hired me. And so there I was running the Indianapolis Marion County Law Library, and that was quite.
So you were the director of the library very shortly after.
Yeah,
completing.
I was the library. I had one assistant, and she kept the books, and that was the rest was up to me, and it was a really fabulous exposure to law librarianship. I would discover after 3-day weekends that they were really hard on fragile marriages, because Indiana had a do-it-yourself divorce law, and so the day after a 3-day holiday, they'd be lined up outside the door to get the
things
forms.
one learns as a law librarian.
Yeah. So I learned a lot from doing that job, and enjoyed being a law librarian. But then I kind of took a real detour, and ended up spending a little over a year in India working with a group there that did rural development. So it was a phenomenal time. I learned so much about myself during that. But then I came back and took a job at Indiana Bloomington and started going to law school.
Let me go back a little bit to this twist in your career, be the Rural Development Coordinator for the Indian Institute of Cultural Affairs. So was that where your interest in travel began, or did you have the interest and said, here's an opportunity to follow my...
Well, I was a European history major. The world was always pretty big in my mind. And so going to India was in part because of a personal relationship, and partially because it seemed like a good thing to do, and it was a chance to really get to know another part of the world. So I went and learned so much about myself, what I was capable of doing, and I learned that my basic minimum requirement is hot water. I can go without a lot of things, but hot water is key.
It's good to know that. Well, we're going to come back to your interest in the larger world, but now you've returned to the U.S. and law librarianship when you became the serials librarian at the Indiana University School of Law in Bloomington in 1982. In 1985, you became the assistant head of technical services there. Tell us a bit about these positions and also how you managed. You already noted that you were going to law school at the same time.
Yeah.
How did you manage to do both the job and law school?
It was a bit challenging. I enjoyed my work. There was a lot to be done, and I managed serials from the purchasing clear through to the title ceased and burying the dead, so so to speak. So it was a really good exposure to working with legal materials, and I learned a great deal from that. I started law school there because I knew I wanted to move up in law librarianship, and that a JD was essential to doing that. So I went part-time for 5 quick years.
Just went by like that.
Yeah, just and would take 2 or 3 courses a semester, and Indiana didn't have an evening program; it was a day program. So I would be working away in my office, and I had a little alarm clock.
Time to go to class.
Remind me to go to class, and I'd jump up and I'd go to class, and if I got called on in the first 5 minutes, I didn't really know where I was or what I was supposed to be doing. So it was always a bit of a challenge making those abrupt transitions from cataloging a serial to sitting in tort. So it was a challenge, but once I sort of got into it, I thought, this is way too much work to quit. I've invested too much already in doing this, and so all of my vacation time went to studying for finals, and so I made it happen.
Well, congratulations. It's not easy.
It wasn't easy. It certainly I've thought back more than once about. It would have been nice to have the more traditional experience of law school, because I was never, I never had this group of
Sure.
friends in the student body. And
was there any awkwardness or anything with regard to being both a member of the staff of the law school and then also a student?
There were moments when it would be, there were 2 other librarians, including the director, that were going to law school too. I started a trend, and so there was a lot of support within the library, and the awkwardness did not come from that situation, but I knew a lot of the faculty well, and so they would respond a little differently to my being in their class. Some of them treated me just like every other student, most of them did. A few were sort of wouldn't call on me, and then there was the professor who liked to save the hard cases for me.
So you got the full gamut of treatment.
So I did, and I was glad that they didn't all save the hard cases for me.
Yeah, that wouldn't
So,
be right.
so that was a challenge. Yeah.
But so just to clarify, you were committed to law librarianship, and you concluded that
Yes.
in order to reach the career goals, you had
Right.
in mind that this JD was going
Right.
to be necessary.
Yeah.
Well, very good. So just to keep us moving on the story of your career after those 6+ years in the southern part of the state, you traveled north to South Bend in June 1987 to become associate director and head of technical services at Notre Dame.
Right. Right.
You spent the next dozen or so years working
Mm-hmm.
in various positions, and usually with Roger Jacobs
Mm-hmm.
as your boss. In fact, based on that experience, you wrote an article which I had the privilege of editing and publishing in Law Library Journal called Managing the Boss, an award-winning article. Want to stress that. I wonder if there's some stories or experiences you might want to tell us about those years in Notre Dame, and especially
Yeah.
working with Roger and the other staff members in South Bend.
Well, I was there for 12 years, and it was a great opportunity. We were really building a collection and building a library. Roger was a great boss and a wonderful mentor. And he just made sure I had plenty of opportunities to grow and expand and become better at what I was doing. I think one of our most ambitious projects was when we bought the library of the Chicago Bar Association.
Right.
They were moving into facilities where they could share John Marshall's collection, and so were divesting themselves of their collection. So we ended up buying about 300,000 volumes and shipping it to South Bend, sorting through it, and one year we added 35,000 titles to the collection. So it was quite ambitious, but Roger had the vision and the courage to move forward on those things, and I just dove in and did what I needed to do to make it happen. We had a wonderful crew of librarians. Many of them are still there, and really a group that worked well together, and were all pretty dedicated to the idea of really making the library an intellectual center for the law school. Roger was easy to manage. Largely because he was good at what he did. He was organized. He knew how to delegate, and that's a skill that I've really come to value. And he could delegate for results and wasn't looking over your shoulder every 2 minutes for, why are you doing that, or how are you doing this, or are you going to get it done, and so forth. So I learned a lot of really important management skills from him. But I also, sort of, I guess intuitively figured out that, if I wanted to present a new idea, or if I wanted to discuss something that required background, he liked memos. And so, and it was really a great way to work, because it would help me to really think through what I was proposing.
So by the time you were ready to present, you were prepared.
Right, I was ready, and he'd had a chance to read beforehand and knew what I was suggesting, and so it made us very much more productive than it would have been if I just kind of wandered in and lobbed my half-formed ideas out there. A lot of managing the boss, however, comes from working with the dean of the law school. I joke the South Bend public school system has permanent substitute teachers. They're employed full-time, and they just go around to wherever there's a need for them. And so I spent 3 years at Notre Dame being the permanent substitute assistant associate dean, and doing various jobs that needed doing. Twice I got to run the London program, and spent 2 fall semesters in London, which was heaven, just absolutely heaven. And then I did a lot of administrative work. And
So in these positions, you were actually working outside the library,
yes,
other
right. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
other duties as assigned.
I did an 8-month stint where I was responsible for the law school budget, admissions, scholarships, staff, and special events, of which there were far more than I realized. So it was really a wonderful opportunity, and you know, it always helped me put the library in the context of the larger organization, which I think is something that's easy for librarians not to do, to not realize that you are part of a larger organization, and that all those other parts of the organization have their needs, and you know, you have to take your turn and be a good team player. So that was really good exposure to that.
I'm sure that you demonstrated on your own your abilities to do these things, but I would imagine, and I wonder if you might want to comment on it, that Roger Jacobs was very supportive of that, and I don't know if paved the way is the right way to put it, but
he opened the doors.
Opened the door, that's much
He
better.
opened the doors. He definitely did. He saw talents and abilities that I didn't really think I had. I was oblivious to them, and you know, he really did groom me for administrative work, and I wasn't the only one. I mean, he did that for others on the staff there as well. Though I was the one who had the ambition to go. So I was, you know, always there going, teach me, you know. But he, you know, I owe him so much. I just, I would never have contemplated doing half of the things I have done without his mentorship and his example. And you know, he was so supportive of my involvement in the association, in everything we were doing in the library, and you know, he was the one that suggested I would be a good fit for some of these, you know, administrative duties in the law school when they were in a spot where someone was retiring or moving away and they had a vacancy, and you know, I also think Roger was always very savvy, and he knew that would keep me at Notre Dame. He wanted to do the London program, and so he did it for a year, and at the point he was deciding to go to London, I had an offer from another institution, and he said, well, why don't you be the director? I'll go to London and you take over my job, and you know, you can try it out and see whether you like it. And so that worked.
Yeah.
I was happy to stay and do those jobs, and you know, try my hand at some of these various duties, and you know, that's how I ended up staying there for 12 years. And so it was a good partnership.
Absolutely. You're there for 12 years at Notre Dame. You develop, you kind of transition, it seems to me, from technical services to larger library administration. Not that there isn't plenty of administration in technical services, but then in 1999 you came to the University of Illinois as director of the library and associate professor of both law and library administration. what was it like to become a full-time director of your own academic library for the first time, not counting your stint
Yes.
as acting director?
Well, it was the first time flying solo, so to speak, because I didn't have the supportive crew that I had at Notre Dame. I had decided I wanted to, become a director, and I didn't want to move too far away from northern Indiana and southern Michigan, where I have some lake property.
Mm-hmm.
So Illinois was ideal in terms of geography. I had been there for library school, and when I was in library school, the law library there at Illinois had been a very vibrant organization, very active in the profession, and then over the years it had just become rather quiet and not very engaged with the larger profession. So I decided that it was a place that there was plenty to do. I've always thought that it's so much better to go into a place where there's a lot of things you can do than going into a well-run organization where it's hard to make your mark because
Sure.
it's in such good shape. So Illinois was, it was a great move. There were quite a number of vacancies in professional positions when I got there. In fact, there was one librarian on staff
Ooh.
and me.
That hurts.
So that first year was rough. Jane Williams was there, and she did a superb job of running reference, and I did 4 searches for librarians. So the first year was difficult. We all wore a lot of different hats, but the upside of that was I got to bring in a group of people who had the same values as I did and the same service orientation, and so all in all, I think it worked out quite
Mm-hmm.
well, and I was able to build some bridges with the faculty in the law school that had were not really in place, and so it was I have often jokingly said, I got rave reviews for smiling in the hallway, saying hi to people, and being outgoing, and so I had a lot of support from the both the College of Law and the University Library. So it worked well. It went well.
So that's a nice segue into another thing I wanted to explore with you. Unlike your previous institutions and unlike most other academic law libraries, the Jenner Law Library at Illinois is not autonomous. It is part of the university libraries. How did this system work for you? And perhaps you want to better explain it than I have characterized it.
Well, when I arrived, we were part of the university library. But we managed to sign a memorandum of understanding in 2007 that transferred the administrative responsibility for the law library from the university library to the College of Law. So Illinois is, the law library there is autonomous.
Now autonomous.
Fortunately, because the university librarian was, Paula Kaufman, was an excellent librarian and a good friend and colleague, we were able to do this without creating any animosity, and she encouraged everyone on her staff to be collegial and cooperative. So the libraries have maintained a very good working relationship and share a lot of resources and so forth. It took some maneuvering to get us to the point of of moving away from the university library. But my the real problem I had with being part of the university library was we were kind of orphaned, particularly when it came to funding and resource sharing. The Illinois campus has very, very strong, prominent programs in the sciences and in engineering, and it was during my time there that all of the scientific publications, skyrocketed
Yes.
in price, and the university library was not going to be accused of not supporting the preeminent programs on campus. And so the law school, good as it is, was not number one. And when you're not number one, that makes a difference.
Sure.
And the sort of assumptions everyone would make were that, well, the College of Law will fundraise for the library and they'll make sure that they're funded. And, well, the college's position was, well, that's not our responsibility. You're part of the university library. It's their job to fund you adequately. And so after an ABA inspection and an AALS inspection where we were identified as a bit of a problem for being so understaffed and under-resourced. So that was really how I sort of moved that ball forward of how are we going to get to a point where we needed to be, and the dean was adamant that she was not going to give money to the university library in the hopes it would come back into our pocket. So we made that switch, and that, I think, is one of the most important things that I did for the health of that library and the law school.
I think the situation you described prior, that leading up to the need for that change is the fear of any academic law librarian about not being an autonomous law school.
Yeah.
Okay. You talked about not having only one professional librarian, and you're right. But one thing that you have had at the University of Illinois is the library school, and I know that you've taken advantage of that and utilized the students to work at the law library, and been really a way of perhaps paying back Roger Jacobs just a little bit in terms of mentoring and bringing some excellent people into the profession. I wonder if you would like to talk about that.
Illinois has a long tradition of providing assistantships for library school master's students. Traditionally, that involved a commitment to work in a library 20 hours a week in exchange for free tuition and a small stipend that was enough to live on. I had an assistantship when I was there in library school, and so it's a great deal. The university library had to pull way back on those assistantships at one point because of funding, and I managed to get the College of Law to pick up a couple of those, funding for a couple of those. So we had 2 or 3 assistants with us for a full calendar year starting in August. They were usually lawyers who were getting a library degree. We had a pretty intensive orientation and training program for them in the fall, and they did a lot of shadowing at reference. And I, with my tech services background, they also had to do,
for you.
time in tech services and learn about that operation, how it works and what it's there for, what they do. and to pick up some training. And then usually by the end of the first semester, they were ready to do some reference on their own, and we would always have backup for them, but we would let them try their hand at that. We used them as teaching assistants and teaching basic legal research, and tried to really give them an overview of what it was to be a law librarian, and do sit down and do some talking about the association and the profession and what were their goals and ambitions and so forth. And I certainly did a lot of coaching during the job search of many of these students, making good choices about where they were going to go.
So I think you were certainly successful in all of those things, because many of them have ended up being really strong members of the profession.
We had great students, great students, and it's just so much fun to bring them aboard each year and to have that influx of new young energy. And it was good for all of us to have them around and have that enthusiasm.
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
You've been active in publishing, teaching, and public speaking through much of your career. What has this meant to you, both professionally and personally?
I think some of it comes from putting on plays in the basement when I was a little girl.
Now you get to be Anna?
Yeah. No longer, all the elves in this Christmas play where my I have just enjoyed being part of the larger profession. And law librarians are terrific people, and I've had so many wonderful opportunities to get to know so many of my colleagues, and I think that's one of the reasons why I have always been eager and happy to do the talks and be on the programs and travel around and to meet with my colleagues. It's been a pleasure. I mean, it's been hard work.
Sure.
But it's also been a wonderful opportunity to get out there, and it's part of something else I learned from Roger, which is when you're out there and you're meeting all these people, it helps you so much. It strengthens your home institution when you can recruit really good people that you've identified their talent out there and you've built some sort of relationship with them, even very tangential.
Sure.
But it makes it a whole lot easier when you have a position to fill to find good talent and get them to come out to the middle of the cornfields, So it hasn't all been just for my enjoyment.
There's some institutional benefits.
Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Let's switch gears a little bit. You've already spoken quite a bit about Roger Jacobs, a very important individual in your professional and personal life. But I wonder if there are others that you've met and worked with during your career that you might want to talk a little bit about.
Well, I have been very lucky in having actually formed a group of close colleagues and dear friends in the law librarian community. And there are a group of us that started out calling itself the Get a Life group because we were all too overcommitted. And we're trying to figure out ways to have a life.
Supportive of getting a life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Judy Meadows, Margie Mays, Tori Trotta, Kay Todd, and I are the Get a Life group. And we've probably been doing this for 10, 15 years, but it's a group of women who are dedicated to the profession, who are extremely bright and very forward thinking, and they have been my inspiration for so many things, and led the way in other directions. They were all on the board of AALL and presidents and treasurers and so forth before I got to that stage, and I learned a lot from them, and I am so pleased that they are my good friends, and we now get together 2 or 3 times a year and go to one another's houses and travel together, and have formed a very close friendship among us. And that's the kind of thing that you just don't have that kind of relationship with people often, and so they've really been role models as well as friends for me.
That's wonderful. Very well said. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about your professional service and your work in the
Right.
ALL and other professional activities. You've served the law library profession in so many ways, too many to mention, really. But I do want to single out your work on the national scene as chair of the technical services special interest section, AALL treasurer, and then most important, AALL president in 2003-2004. You've touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to ask you directly if you can tell us a little bit about what being so professionally active has meant to you.
It's meant a great deal to me. I have enjoyed all of it. It's been a way for me to sort of give back to the larger profession. I mean, doing well in my home institution, doing my job is always important. But there were things that I saw that were important to all of us, and that I wanted to be a participant in moving the profession forward and ensuring that law librarians had the kind of recognition they deserve, the kind of environments where they would flourish. Mm-hmm. And we have lots of problems to solve, and by nature I'm a problem solver. That's what I do, and collectively we're able to do a lot. Individually, you can do a bit on your home turf, but it's really as part of a larger group that you can really do important things for law librarianship. I think we tend to get so immersed in our day-to-day that we forget how important our work is. That's certainly one of the things that I have discovered in my travels to other parts of the world is, you really don't have functioning democracies without access to the law. You can't have a rule of law without everybody knowing what it is. And and that is a critical role we play in society. And in many countries, there isn't a profession. I mean, in a lot of countries, there's no rule of law, and B, there's no body of legal literature for anybody to worry about. But in lots of places, there is a real need for a law library community to rise up and take on some of the roles that we perform in this country. So that's always been an important thing in my mind. Mm-hmm. and that's one of the areas that being active professionally has allowed me to make a contribution to. So
very good. I mentioned that you served as ALL president in 2003-2004. You adopted Boston to Mumbai, the world of legal information, as the theme of your year, and particularly the 2004 annual meeting in Boston, over which you presided. Can you talk about what you consider to be some important initiatives and accomplishments of your presidential tenure?
Well, certainly one of the things we were able to do as a former treasurer, I was aware that we had dipped into the current reserve fund because of some problems with some annual meetings, right after 2001, we had a real drop-off in attendance, and that took a chunk out of our current reserves. So through a lot of cost-cutting measures of various sorts, we were able to build that fund back up to the level that it was optimal to have. So I'm not sure that anybody but me noticed that, but it did make a difference. I also had the pleasure of having Tori Trotta as my vice president, and so she and I sort of collaborated on some things that she wanted to do that we could start during the year I was president, and some things that I wanted to see go forward, and that she could carry those forward. And I think both of us were focused on really assisting the board in being working on sort of a little higher level of being more visionary for the association, of being more focused on the larger picture. I, as treasurer, used classic example in board orientation of the cereal aisle in the grocery store. This is sort of my moments of
creative inspiration.
Yes. So I would tell people, I go to the grocery, I'm a single woman, I make a nice salary, I walk up and down the aisles, I pick what I want, I don't focus a lot on, the price of things, I have that luxury, until I get to the cereal aisle, and I refuse to spend. At that point, more than $3 a box for cereal, it's probably $10 a box now. And my point was that everybody has their cereal aisle. Everyone has something that they will focus on that can be all-consuming, but in reality is just a minor thing in the scheme of things. So I think both Tori and I really were trying to work to help create the environment where the board was working on a higher level, and
trying to avoid too many cereals.
Trying to avoid the cereal aisles, trying to have the board see its role as one of more leadership, more of being the leaders of the association rather than the caretakers. And so I think we made good progress with that.
I would certainly say so. My observation of the association and the way the board works over the years has really seen that a dramatic improvement in that.
Yes, I think so, and it certainly was moving in that direction before Tori and I came along, but we really both focused on that and tried to figure out how to sort of institutionalize that or embed that mindset in the structure of how the board works, so that it would go forward. So
well, I'm glad you mentioned working with Tori. That's another thing that really needs to be stressed, which is that it's very difficult for most initiatives to be completed in a single year. So
Exactly.
it's really a whole presidential term, and including your successors and your predecessors.
Yeah. It's one of the things I while I was treasurer, and in talking with colleagues who had aspirations to take leadership positions, they had this list of my top 12 things I'm gonna I want to be able to do. Well, you're lucky if you get one thing done. You don't have time. You just don't have time, and so you have to think seriously about what is the most important thing for you and for the association, and then put your energies in, getting that one thing moving forward, because you can't really do more than that. And even getting one thing done is pretty a big accomplishment.
But you can get them going.
Yes.
And once they have a momentum,
yes,
they can be completed.
Right.
But they'll never get done if you don't get them going.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, now we're going to return to where, not exactly where we started, but pretty close to the beginning. Your position with the Indian Institute of Cultural Affairs at the very beginning of your career, and your choice of the theme for your presidential year, it shows that you have a strong and long-standing interest in the importance of international connections in today's world. Can you speak about that interest more directly now, and in particular about your work with Frank Liu in founding the Chinese and American Forum on Legal Information in Law Libraries, which to date has sponsored 2 conferences in China and 1 in the U.S. Those are accomplishments to be proud of.
Well, it felt at times like the old Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney movies. Judy and Mickey put on a show. Well, let me start back with. I've long had an interest in other cultures and other parts of the world, and certainly was aware early on of the fact that business went global, so law's got to go global too. And working in London those 2 semesters really confirmed for me that there is a big legal community out there that is multinational, and that it's important to prepare our students to operate in that world, and to be ready as librarians and firm and government, wherever, to handle the demands of working in an international environment. For example, in London, we had 2 students every year who would do an internship with a family law practitioner who only did multinational work. That was his expertise of, divorce between somebody from Italy and somebody from Canada,
sure.
And just all of all of those interactions that happen, not just on the business level, but we all move around and live in different countries for a while, and that has consequences. So that's sort of what prompted. And I have to confess that my original theme was Boston to Bombay, but of course then Bombay had recently changed its name, so we went with
it was a shame
Mumbai.
That alliteration was lost.
Yes.
Only they'd waited a year.
Yes, and I tried to think of other B cities, but it's just, that's how it ended up. So I've always had a commitment, I think, to helping all of us, to being prepared to work in a much more multinational environment. So I have always enjoyed going to meetings with IL, and I
International Association.
Yeah, and I did have a brief term on the board there before I retired, and you just learn so much, and you build those connections that can be extremely valuable in your everyday work when you need them. In the law school setting, we certainly have plenty of faculty who are doing
Sure.
all sorts of comparative law and international law, of course, and you never know when you're going to need to know a little bit about someplace, or at least somebody there who can help you out. Frank Liu and I worked together on the board. He was on the AALL board when I was treasurer, and so we were aware of one another's ability to get things done. Frank has run a program in Beijing for Duquesne Law School in the summers for, I don't know, a long time. And he really was troubled by the status of law librarians in China, and how really unconnected they were with the larger world, and undervalued in many ways by their institutions. So he had this vision of getting American and Chinese law librarians together, and at that point my campus was very interested in building relations in China, and so I said, Frank, I'd be happy to help. And he asked me to be the co-founder and co-chair, and we went from there. And it's been an amazing adventure. Not the smoothest ride in the world, but Frank has wonderful connections in the academic community and the educational community in Beijing, and knew how to
Make things happen,
because you can't just book a hotel conference center and show up. So he did accomplished a great deal in getting the right people to say yes to the idea of us having the conference. And I worked with a number of legal publishers to come up with funding to do this, and we worked with our colleagues in China to arrange facilities and so forth. We did the first conference in May 2009, and in October of 2008, so roughly 6 months before the conference, Frank and I and a group of about 6 or 7 of us went over to do some face-to-face discussions on the program with our colleagues in venues and so forth. And the day we were to leave on Saturday, and Thursday one of our colleagues announced that we really had no venue. That the place we had thought we were going to hold this conference had asked for a room guarantee for 250 people, and we just didn't think we could do that. So Friday and Saturday were the mad rush around Beijing to find a place. And Saturday morning we found, the last place we went to, we found it was perfect. It was just perfect. And we went from there to the airport.
Or anything else could happen.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And our Chinese colleagues did a beautiful job on the local arrangements in their side of the program, and we had about 60 come from the U.S., and it was very productive. Then 2 years later we did one in Philadelphia, and that too was well attended and went well. And then about a year ago we did one in Shanghai. That was another success, and I think Philadelphia is going to be up again next summer for another conference. So I've gotten to know a number of Chinese law librarians and legal academics, and it's been a great adventure.
Well, that's fabulous.
Yeah, and I kept putting the bug in the IL ear that IL should do a conference in China, and I think 2017 that might happen. That we might be able to get CAFL and IL to work with our Chinese colleagues and make that happen.
Good for you. Congratulations on that. It sounds like it's both professionally and personally extremely rewarding.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
The workload of the ALL president seems obvious. I don't think we really have to belabor that, but I'm sure that all of your professional activities have been time-consuming. Do you have any suggestions for newer law library colleagues on how they should approach professional service in the do more with less environment in which so many work today?
Yes, well, it's a challenge. It really is, and it's hard for people to carve out time. I think the best advice I can give is to be very strategic about how you use your time, both in the workplace and in your work for the association. You can't just work like a dog, because there'll always be more.
Right.
There'll always be more things for you to do. What I think is the most helpful is to look at the things on your to-do list and look for the keys. Look for those things that if you get that done, 4 or 5 other things just ripple out from that. So I think that is really an important skill to develop. The skill, one of the many skills I learned from Roger was delegating. You have to be willing to let go of certain things. You have to trust your colleagues. I think you trust people till you find out that what you've given them to do was too much, or you didn't give them enough background, or they're just not the person to take on those kind of tasks. But if you don't learn how to delegate well, then the people who are going to come after you don't get a chance to grow. They don't get a chance to spread their wings and try new things. So you really have to be willing to hand things off, mentor, be there as a backup, but not believe that you have to be in the middle of everything that's going on in your workplace. And I think that's true of working with the association too. If you're chairing a committee or working on a board, you have to be willing to not have your hands on everything. You can't do it, and you'll find that your ability to actually accomplish things is really diminished by thinking that you have to control everything. So I think delegating is very important. I think as someone who's found herself overcommitted on many occasions, it's a disease that you have to learn how to control it. You are going back to our Get a Life group. You have to have a life outside of all of this, and you have to be sure that you make time for that, and that you take care of yourself, and don't let yourself get too overwhelmed. Being overwhelmed every once in a while is not a bad thing. It helps you become more strategic, and it helps you understand your capacity for work. But it also can turn into disasters, and you got to watch for those too. But I think it's being strategic about how you spend your time and what you invest in.
That's good advice. You have been previously honored by your peers with a Law Library Journal Article of the Year, for managing the boss.
Yes.
The Renee Chapman Memorial Award for Outstanding Contributions in Technical Services Law Librarianship. And on Tuesday of this week, you will receive ALL's highest honor, the Marion Gould Gallagher Distinguished Service Award. What does such recognition from your peers mean to you?
It's amazing. I mean, I know that I have been involved. I can look at my own resume and see all the things that I have done. But being recognized by your peers is just, it's a thrill. It's, I don't know whether humbling is really the right word, but, you get that sense. I am very honored, and it's part of, what a way to end a career.
Yeah.
What a way to go out. And so I'm very pleased and I'm very honored. And I did meet Marion Gallagher once when she was at, I think it was the Reno meeting, and she was elderly at that point, but she was with some reception, and she was, I think she might have been in a wheelchair. She was certainly seated when I met her and smoking a cheroot.
Yes.
And just, I thought, wow.
I actually did a program with her at that meeting, and I don't think she was in a wheelchair, and I can certainly say that she was bright as a tack.
Yeah,
And the cheroot does not surprise me whatsoever.
Right, yeah. Well, I have had the pleasure of knowing and working with many of the winners of the Gallagher Award, and so I am quite honored to be part of that group.
Well, I can certainly say from a member's viewpoint that you belong on that list. There's no question whatsoever about that.
Thank you.
Well, as we've talked about, you've mentioned very briefly, you've now retired. You've been retired for 2 weeks about, I think. So it seems totally appropriate to ask you to reflect on the state of legal education in general, which you've been a part of for so many years, and academic law librarianship in particular during what can only be described as a period of tremendous change.
Right. The economic model of legal education is changing, and it needs to change. And as a consequence, certainly the way law libraries have done their work has got to change. I think we need to redefine for ourselves what it is we do, take away the language that we've used all these years that tie us to print collections and in everyone else's mind tie us to print collections. So I think we have the opportunity to really provide some leadership in our institutions by looking at what needs to be done and looking at where our skills and talents are, and how do we use those in more creative ways. Just being the person at the desk waiting for someone to come and ask you a question. We can't do that anymore. I mean, we've always been rather passive as in our role as librarians, and that's a waste of our talents and our energies, and it makes libraries very vulnerable to budget cuts. We have to be ready for budget cuts. We have to be much more articulate in explaining where our money goes and how how we're funded. I think we have to think long and hard about that. I think we have to have a voice in how the ABA sets standards for libraries and be very creative and forward-thinking as that transforms and changes. But first of all, we have to understand what it is we do and contribute and use some new language for ourselves to describe that. And I think that will then help us move forward. But we've so much of what we've done in libraries is based on protecting our print collections, our hours of operation, our loan policies, our design, the configuration of our libraries, and we got to get over that. We just got to get over that. And so I think one of my professional regrets is that I never got to design a library, because it would have looked very different from the ones I have worked in. But I think it's talking about what do you do when you're doing reference. Well, you're not finding references. We don't do that.
Right.
We understand and know how to manipulate information resources, and we know how to provide the information that people need, and we need to talk more about how we deliver that information and how we tailor our delivery systems in ways that are useful to people, and how we become really better partners in the research enterprise for our faculty, because we can just dump tons of stuff on their plate, and that doesn't really help.
Good point.
It doesn't really help. And if we know more about what they're doing, if we read their scholarship, and if we pay more attention to how they work, then we can be much more useful. And I think those are important areas for us to develop as professionals. And we need to stop worrying about teaching our students to look at the pocket part. We need to move teaching legal research skills to a level where we're engaging those critical thinking skills that are so important, and all their other classes are developing, and help them to be very intelligent consumers of legal information, and much more knowledgeable about how the online world is structured and how it works and all of that.
Very, very perceptive thoughts. Thank you. I won't ask you if your glass is half full or half empty on how that's all going to play out. You're retired. You don't really have to make that prediction.
I don't have to make that prediction, and I just wish my colleagues the best, and really trust that there are wonderful people in the profession who will figure these things out, and it's their turn.
There you go. I think that's a great way to put it. It is their turn. I feel the same way. Janis, before we end our conversation, I want to make sure you have the opportunity to touch on any topics that are important to you that perhaps we might have missed. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we end?
I think the only thing is just to encourage everybody to think outside the box. It's so easy to develop a pattern and become set in the way we look at things and do things, and every once in a while everybody needs to just shake all that stuff off and try their hand at something new, and have the confidence that you can do it. I mean, I think I've developed confidence that I can take things on, mostly by being kind of thrown in and You know what?
Good things happen.
I did figure that out.
Well, your career is the epitome of
Yeah.
taking on challenges and
yeah.
being successful
Yeah.
and meeting them, and it's
Yeah.
you're a great role model. You talked
Thank
about
you.
Roger Jacobs as a role model, but I think you're right up there with
Oh, well,
Roger.
that's high praise. That's high praise. Thank you.
Janice Johnston, on behalf of Pat Keogh, Michelle Wu, and Dick Spinelli, my colleagues on the Oral History of Law Librarianship Project, I want to thank you for taking time to speak with us today about your experiences as a law librarian. Your remarks will be a valuable addition to the project and of interest to both current colleagues and to those who will join the profession in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.